Most of us live in a world where the greatest threat to our survival is a weak Wi-Fi signal or a DoorDash driver who can't find the side gate. We have outsourced our survival to a series of invisible grids that keep the lights on, the water running, and the climate set to a crisp 72 degrees, regardless of what the sun is doing outside. We've become remarkably comfortable with the idea that the planet is a service provider. But if you zoom out far enough, past the suburbs and the shipping lanes, you'll find corners of this planet that never signed the contract. There are places where groceries arrive once every few months, provided the sea doesn't feel like swallowing the boat that day. Places where your eyelashes freeze into tiny jagged needles the second you step outside, and where the air is so thin, your brain starts treating reality as a suggestion rather than a fact. People have spent centuries trying to stake a claim in the most isolated, hostile environments Earth has to offer. Some people left in a hurry, some people stayed. And the ones who stayed had to make terms with a planet that doesn't particularly care if they make it to breakfast. The question isn't just how we live in these places, but what that kind of isolation actually demands from a human being. Welcome to the Waxenvein Ledger, an archive of the unknown, the overlooked, and the places most maps barely acknowledge. Today, we're exploring some of the most isolating places people have chosen to call home. If you want to see what happens when the planet wins the negotiation, you have to go to the Arctic Circle, specifically to a place called Pyramiden. In the middle of the Svalbard archipelago, there is a Soviet mining town that looks like someone pressed pause on the height of the Cold War and then walked away forever. At its peak, over 800 people lived here, mining coal in a landscape where 24-hour darkness is a seasonal reality and polar bears literally outnumber the residents. It was meant to be a showcase of socialist efficiency, a paradise on the edge of the world with a heated swimming pool and a grand piano that is still the northernmost piano on Earth. But in 1998, the money ran out and the coal dried up, and the humans vanished in a matter of months. Today, Pyramiden is a ghost town preserved in a deep freeze. The lockers still have boots in them. The classrooms still have drawings on the walls. It turns out that ideology doesn't actually provide much insulation against negative 40 degrees. The psychological toll of living in a place where you can't leave without an armed guard and a death wish eventually outweighs the paycheck. Pyramiden is a monument to the fact that isolation can be tolerated for a while, but once the buffer of modern logistics fails, the Earth moves back in to reclaim the furniture. While Pyramiden is a story about the exit strategy, some communities decided that the distance was actually the point. Welcome to Tristan da Cunha, a tiny speck of volcanic rock in the South Atlantic that is officially the most remote inhabited island on the planet. To give you some perspective, the nearest continent is about 1,500 miles away. There is no airport. There is no harbour for large ships. If you want to get there, you have to catch a fishing boat from South Africa and spend a week being tossed around by the Atlantic like a piece of driftwood. About 250 people live here, and they are essentially the world's most committed neighbours. In 1961, a volcanic eruption forced the entire population to evacuate to England, where they were exposed to the wonders of modern consumerism and 60s culture. 2 years later, almost all of them voted to go back to the rock. Think about that level of commitment. They traded the London Underground for a place where you can't move across town because there isn't a town to move to. Social isolation here is a different beast entirely. If you get into an argument with someone on Tristan da Cunha, you're going to have a hard time pretending they don't exist. There's nowhere to accidentally avoid them. Conflict doesn't dissipate. It just becomes part of the atmosphere. Sometimes, the surface of the Earth is so aggressively hostile that the only solution is to move beneath it. In the middle of the Australian Outback sits Coober Pedy, a town that looks like a Mad Max set because, quite frankly, it basically is. The summer temperatures here regularly hit a casual 120 degrees, which is a great temperature for a slow-cooked brisket, but a terrible one for a human being. Instead of fighting the sun, the residents of Coober Pedy simply disappeared. They carved their homes, their churches, and their hotels directly into the earth. It's a town of tunnels and artificial light, where the extreme heat outside is just a rumor you hear through several feet of sandstone. There is a quiet, rhythmic claustrophobia to living underground. You trade the horizon for structural stability. It's an architectural admission of defeat. We couldn't adapt to that kind of heat, so we surrendered the sky. In Coober Pedy, humans have figured out how to normalize a subterranean existence, proving that we'll happily live like moles if it means we don't have to spontaneously combust on the way to the mailbox. But heat and darkness are manageable compared to a place that actively tries to starve your brain of its primary fuel. High in the Peruvian Andes, tucked away at 16,700 feet, is La Rinconada. This is the highest permanent settlement on the planet, and by all rights, it shouldn't exist. The air is so thin that the oxygen levels are roughly half of what you're breathing right now. For most people, this is the altitude where the body stops functioning and starts panicking. Headaches, dizziness, and a permanent state of mental fog are just the entry requirements. So why are people there? Gold. Thousands of people endure chronic hypoxia and freezing temperatures because the ground is rich with a metal that we've decided is worth more than our respiratory health. It is a community built on economic desperation and physical endurance. When every breath becomes a conscious effort, ambition becomes an incredibly expensive trait. The isolation of La Rinconada isn't just about the miles of steep, jagged mountain passes. It's about the fact that your own biology is fighting your presence there every second of the day. If La Rinconada is where the air fights you, Oymyakon is where the temperature itself is a predatory force. This is a village in Siberia that holds the title for the coldest permanently inhabited place on Earth. We're talking about winters that can drop to negative 76 degrees Celsius. That's about negative 90 Fahrenheit. At that temperature, the sun is less of a celestial body and more of a vague rumor that occasionally brightens the sky for a few hours. People here have to leave their car engines running all day because if they stop, the oil will turn into a solid block of ice. School only closes if it drops below negative 55 degrees Celsius. There is a specific kind of silence that comes with that level of cold. A stillness where the air feels like it might shatter if you speak too loudly. Your skin starts to freeze in minutes. In Oymyakon, even your optimism needs thermal insulation. Over time, the extreme stops being a crisis and just becomes the morning routine. You don't brave the cold, you just exist within the narrow margins it allows you. The environment sets the rules and you adjust your personality accordingly. When you look at these places together, the frozen ruins of Pyramiden, the lonely rock of Tristan, the tunnels of Coober Pedy, and the breathless heights of the Andes, you start to realize that our modern world is just a massive exercise in creating a buffer. We have built a world of pavement and plastic that softens the sharp edges of the planet. These places don't feel dramatic, they feel honest. The safety net thins out, the rules become visible, comfort turns conditional. The planet doesn't need to oppose us. It just sets the limits and waits to see who adapts. Most of us live in the buffered spaces, in the grids and the zones where survival is an assumption rather than a negotiation. But it's worth remembering that the edges are still out there, silent and unyielding. There are still places where the wind and the cold doesn't care about your plans. If you're the kind of person who likes to look at the blank spots on the map and wonder what the silence actually sounds like, you might want to stick around for the next journey. You can support the channel by hitting the subscribe button below. I'd love to hear which of these places you think would break you first, or if you would prefer to live in a corner of the world that doesn't care for visitors. Let me know in the comments. After all, the world is a lot bigger than the view from your window, and most of it is still waiting for a chance to remind us who's really in charge. Until next time, stay curious, and maybe cut your Wi-Fi some slack.